Disgrace to politics. That's how President Donald Trump, the 47th Commander-in-Chief, spat his contempt across the chamber. But this wasn't just another hearing. This was a battlefield. In America, where over 62 million people still live with racial bias, and more than 40% of citizens believe justice bends for the powerful, the world was watching. And in that moment, one woman refused to bow. Her name was Jasmine Crockett, a fierce voice, a warrior for justice, standing alone against the most powerful man in the nation. What began as an insult would ignite a confrontation so raw, so unfiltered, that millions would remember it as the day truth challenged power. And then, bang! The gavel slammed against the block with a force that seemed to split the air itself. The chamber shuddered into silence. Yet beneath that silence was a storm waiting to break loose. Order! This hearing is now in session. Siate torni. The chairman's voice rang out, steady but strained, as though even he knew the weight of what was about to unfold. The room was suffocating. Cameras whirred and clicked like restless insects. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised, eyes gleaming, desperate to capture the history they knew was about to be written. Every seat was filled. Every whisper carried the electricity of anticipation. The nation was watching, the world was watching, and there at the center of it all sat Donald Trump. The 47th President of the United States leaned back in his chair as if the hearing was nothing more than a formality. His lips curled into a smirk. His eyes, cold and unblinking, swept across the room like a predator surveying prey. He exuded power, arrogance, a dangerous kind of certainty. And then, without hesitation, Jasmine Crockett rose to her feet. Her chair scraped against the floor, a sharp sound that sliced through the tense silence. Her hands trembled for a fraction of a second, but her voice did not. "I am not here to listen to lies," she declared, each word cutting the air with precision. "I am here to expose the truth." The chamber erupted in murmurs. Cameras pivoted toward her, flashes bursting like lightning. Some gasped, some scoffed, but everyone felt it. Something irreversible had just begun. Trump tilted his head, his smirk widening. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the desk before him, the rhythm of a man who believed no one could touch him. He didn't speak, not yet, because Jasmine's words had landed like the first strike of a hammer against stone. The chairman cleared his throat. "Representative Crockett, proceed." Jasmine inhaled deeply. For a heartbeat, she closed her eyes, not to retreat, but to summon the fire she knew she would need. When she opened them again, they blazed with determination. "Mr. President," she began, her gaze locking onto Trump's with unflinching intensity, "you have evaded questions, twisted truths, and mocked this very institution. But today, the walls of this chamber will echo with the facts you cannot bury." Trump finally leaned forward, his chin resting on his clasped hands. His voice came low, dripping with contempt. "You think you can stand against me? You'll break before this is over." The words slithered through the chamber, a taunt meant to wound. Jasmine did not blink. Her jaw tightened, her shoulders squared. And then she spoke again, louder, firmer, as if speaking not only to Trump, but to every man, woman, and child watching across the nation. "No, what will break here today is the illusion that power can silence justice." Gasps rippled through the audience. Reporters scribbled furiously. And somewhere, deep in the crowd, a lone clap broke the silence before being swallowed by the tension. The chairman's gavel struck again. "Order!" Shabi, but there was no order anymore. There was only the beginning of war. Trump shifted in his chair, finally breaking his composure, if only slightly. His eyes narrowed. The smirk faltered, replaced by something darker, recognition. He knew this would not be another easy performance. He knew Jasmine Crockett was not here to play by the rules of his stage. For the first time, Donald Trump seemed less like the master of the room and more like a man that's staring at the first crack in his fortress. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice dropping low enough that the room had to lean in to hear. "This is not about me. This is not even about you. This is about the truth you've tried to bury under your throne of lies." The words hit like thunder, rolling across the marble walls. Trump's fist clenched, his knuckles whitening against the polished wood. He opened his mouth, ready to unleash the storm that had been building behind his sneer. But before he could speak, the chairman raised the gavel once more. "Then let the record show," he said solemnly, "that this hearing has begun." And just like that, history took its first breath. The cameras zoomed in. The audience held theirs. The confrontation was no longer a question of if. It was now only a matter of how far it would go. Trump leaned back in his chair, shoulders squared, lips twisting into that familiar smirk that had become both infamous and magnetic. His voice carried not only across the chamber, but through every camera broadcasting live. "A second-rate congresswoman thinks she can question the president?" The words dripped with mockery, sharpened to wound. He didn't say her name, didn't need to. He reduced Jasmine Crockett to a caricature, a footnote, a nuisance he could swat away with a phrase. The chamber gasped as if struck. Reporters jolted forward, pens flying. Supporters of the president erupted in laughter, clapping their hands against the desks like spectators at a coliseum. Others stiffened in their seats, faces pale with disgust. And in the center of it all, Jasmine stood unmoved. She tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into a slow, deliberate smile. One not of amusement, but of defiance. Her eyes narrowed, cutting through the air like glass. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, steady, and dangerous. "Mr. President," she said, every syllable a nail driven into the silence, "it is precisely because you are the president that you must answer to justice." Her words echoed, refusing to die. The laughter faltered. The chamber shifted uneasily, and then a murmur began to spread, swelling like a tide. Some in the audience leaned forward, nodding, whispering, "She's right." Others scoffed louder, shaking their heads, muttering about insolence, about arrogance. But no one was silent. No one was neutral anymore. Trump's jaw tightened, though his smile remained fixed. He leaned toward the microphone, letting the weight of his presence fill the space again. "Justice," he repeated, as though the word itself was a joke. "You talk about justice as if you own it. You stand there in front of millions, acting like your voice matters more than the will of the American people. You don't represent truth. You represent noise." The insult landed heavy, intentional, crafted for the cameras. Gas rippled again. The clash had gone from spark to flame. Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she allowed a brief silence to stretch, every second turning the tension tighter, every heartbeat pounding louder. And then she struck. "My voice doesn't need to be louder than the people's," she said, her tone quickening, rising, pulsing with conviction. "My duty is to make sure their cries for justice are heard, even when men in power like you try to drown them out." The chamber erupted. On one side, Trump loyalists slammed their fists on desks, shouting outrage and disrespect. On the other, Crockett's allies and silent observers burst into applause, the sharp sound ricocheting off marble walls. The air became electric, thick, alive with conflict. The chairman pounded his gavel. "Order! Order in this chamber!" But there was no order now. There was only division, raw and exposed. Trump leaned back once more, though this time his smirk carried a shadow of something else: irritation. He waved his hand dismissively, but the tremor in his jaw betrayed him. "You think your theatrics change anything?" he sneered. "You think a speech makes you equal to the President of the United States?" The cameras closed in on Jasmine. She took a single step forward, her heels striking against the polished floor like a drumbeat of defiance. Her eyes locked on Trump, her voice rising until it rang clear through every corner of the chamber. "No, Mr. President. What makes me equal to you is not my title, but the truth I carry. And that truth cannot be mocked, cannot be silenced, cannot be erased." The chamber froze. Even those who despised her could not deny the conviction blazing in her words. The silence that followed was not emptiness. It was awe, laced with dread. For the first time, the balance shifted. Not fully, not completely, but the seed had been planted. A woman once dismissed as second-rate had stood her ground before the most powerful office in the nation, and in doing so, had drawn the line that could no longer be ignored. The crowd no longer breathed as one. It had split in two. On one side, loyalty to power. On the other, loyalty to truth. And between them, in that chamber of history, Donald Trump and Jasmine Crockett prepared to turn words into weapons sharper than any blade. The gavel slammed again, but the noise barely registered. The hearing was no longer under control. It was a battlefield. And the first shot had already been fired. Trump's eyes gleamed with the spark of a man who had never backed down from a stage. He straightened, leaning forward into the microphone, his voice booming across the chamber with the weight of certainty. "You call yourself a defender of justice?" he began, his tone heavy with disdain. "Let me remind you, Congresswoman, who I am. I rebuilt this nation's economy. I gave Americans jobs when no one else could. I stood up against enemies abroad, and I made our country strong, stronger than it had ever been." He spoke not to her, but to the cameras, to the millions watching. Each word was crafted not as an answer, but as a performance. "I cut taxes. I secured borders. I ended endless wars. I am the reason millions of families thrived. And while you were busy shouting from the sidelines, I was out there making history." The chamber thundered with applause from his supporters, their cheers rising like a tidal wave crashing against stone walls. The sound was deafening, suffocating, pressing down on every word Jasmine might attempt to form. She parted her lips to respond, but Trump's hand shot up, slicing the air. "Don't interrupt me," he barked, his voice sharp, commanding. "This isn't about you. It's about what I have done for this country, what no one else had the strength to do." The chairman's gavel struck the wood. "Mr. President, the witness has the right to respond." But Trump plowed ahead, his momentum unstoppable. "I rebuilt the military. I faced down dictators, and they respected me. They feared me. I protected faith, family, and freedom when the left wanted to tear it all apart. And now you stand there, a nobody, pretending you can hold me accountable?" Gasps, claps, and shouts blended into a cacophony. The room was alive with chaos, and in the middle of it, Jasmine's figure stood frozen, her voice drowned before it could rise. She tried again, lifting her chin. "Mr. President, the record shows—" "Wrong!" Trump boomed, cutting her off, jabbing a finger in the air. "You don't know the record. You don't have the record. I am the record. My achievements speak louder than your petty accusations." The chairman slammed his gavel harder. "Mr. President, allow the Congresswoman to speak." But the tide had already shifted. Trump's dominance filled every corner of the room, his voice reverberating like thunder, his sheer force of personality bending the atmosphere to his will. "I created the greatest economy in the history of this country. Everyone knows it. Everyone felt it. And you, standing there, dare to call me unjust? You dare to lecture me?" The audience was no longer just divided. It was polarized to breaking point. One side roared in approval, standing, fists raised high as if in a rally. The other side hissed, shouted back, their faces twisted in outrage. It was no longer a hearing. It was a war of sound. Jasmine pressed her palms against the table, steadying herself. Her heart pounded, but she refused to let her eyes waver. Yet each time she leaned toward the microphone, Trump's booming voice crashed over hers, a tidal wave against a lone flame. "Jobs, strength, freedom, those are my legacy. Not scandals, not lies, not this circus you're putting on today. People didn't put me in this seat to bow to your judgment. They put me here to lead, to fight, to win." The gavel cracked again. "Mr. President, enough. You must allow space for response." But Trump only leaned back, spreading his arms wide, his smirk triumphant. "Go ahead," he said mockingly. "Let her try. Let her tell you all about her truth. And let's see if anyone even remembers her words after mine." The crowd erupted once more, their cheers and boos colliding into a storm. Jasmine drew in a breath, but for the first time, doubt pricked at her resolve. The power in the room was lopsided, crushing, relentless. Every second that passed, Trump's presence grew larger, louder, heavier, until even the marble walls seemed to reverberate with his name. This was not a debate, it was a spectacle, a show of absolute dominance. And in that moment, Jasmine found herself pushed to the edge of silence, her words buried beneath the avalanche of Trump's voice, his accomplishments, his bravado. The chamber was no longer just listening, it was conquered, and she was cornered. For a fleeting moment, The weight of Trump's voice seemed unshakable, as if his sheer will had carved the chamber into his domain. But then, silence. A silence that was hers. Jasmine did not fire back with words. Not yet. Instead, she reached forward, pressing a single button on the panel before her. The screens behind the dais flickered. The lights dimmed. And suddenly, across towering monitors, documents lit up the room. Bank records, testimonies, dates, signatures, and numbers stamped in black and white. The audience, mid-cheer and jeer, froze. A hush spread like a wave. Jasmine's voice cut through the quiet, sharp, and steady. Mr. President, you speak of legacy, but the legacy of a leader is not written by what he claims. It is written by what he hides. The first slide shifted. Emails, names, transactions traced from corporate donors to private accounts. Murmurs rippled. Faces turned from the screens back to Trump, then to her, then to each other. Trump leaned back, forced a laugh, waving his hand dismissively. Fake news. Old tricks. You think the American people haven't seen this before? But the laughter did not land. It cracked at the edges, brittle. Jasmine stepped closer to the mic, her tone unwavering. These are sworn testimonies, from your own advisors, from men and women who stood by your side until the lies grew too heavy for them to carry. A second slide appeared. Video footage. A former cabinet member, under oath, describing pressure, favors, and backroom deals. Gas cut through the chamber. The tension shifted. The same crowd that had roared at Trump's boasts now leaned forward, their excitement mutating into disbelief. Trump's jaw tightened. He gripped the desk, the knuckles of his hand whitening, but still he barked, "Liars! Traitors! Everyone wants 15 minutes of fame!" Jasmine didn't flinch. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, not of mockery, but of certainty. 15 minutes, she repeated softly. These people risked everything, reputation, career, safety, to tell the truth. You taught them loyalty. But now even loyalty cannot cover corruption. The third blow landed. A ledger projected large enough for every eye to see. Transactions linked directly to shell companies, foreign accounts, shadow deals that carried his unmistakable signature. The crowd erupted again, this time not in his favor. Shouts of, "Explain this!" and "Answer her!" broke the air. Trump's smirk faltered, just for a second. His eyes darted to the screens, then back to Jasmine, searching for footing. But Jasmine pressed harder. Her words were no longer questions, they were indictments. Mr. President, while you claim to fight for the people, these documents show how you fought for profit. While families struggled to put food on their tables, money flowed into secret channels under your name. The weight of her accusation didn't need embellishment. The evidence glared from the screen, undeniable, irrefutable. Trump slammed his palm onto the desk. This is political theater, nothing more. I am the victim here, and you. The chairman's gavel struck like thunder. Order! Order! But the momentum had shifted. The once divided chamber tilted in her direction. Supporters of Trump, who had cheered only minutes ago, now sat in uneasy silence. Some whispered to each other, heads bowed, unable to reconcile the images before their eyes with the man at the microphone. Jasmine's voice rose, firm, resonant. Power built on lies is not power, it is theft. And justice, Mr. President, does not bow to volume. It answers only to truth. The words struck harder than any shout. They carried the weight of the documents, the testimony, the witnesses. Trump forced another laugh, but this one trembled, hollow. Truth? You wouldn't know truth if it... But he stopped, because the screen behind her changed again. This time it wasn't numbers. It wasn't signatures. It was a face, a former ally, a man who had once defended him ferociously, now sitting under oath, saying words that rang like a verdict. I was told to lie, and I did. For him. The silence that followed was absolute. No cheer, no boo. Only the collective sound of breath being held. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply let the evidence hang in the air like a guillotine waiting to fall. Trump's shoulders stiffened, his lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time that day, he looked not like a conqueror, but like a man cornered. The battlefield had shifted. The applause was gone. The balance of power no longer tilted his way. Justice had begun to speak, and it spoke with her voice. And for the first time, the great showman's stage seemed to crumble beneath his feet. Trump lurched forward, his chair screeching across the marble floor. Then he rose. His bulk towered over the desk, chest heaving, face flushed crimson. The microphones crackled as his hand came crashing down. Bam! This, he growled, spittle catching the corners of his lips, is a witch hunt. The words thundered through the chamber, raw, guttural, primal. It was no longer a performance, it was rage unmasked. The camera zoomed in, feeding the nation a close-up of the storm. Eyes blazing, jaw clenched, sweat glistening on the temple of a man who once commanded every room he entered. Half the crowd erupted, chanting in fevered loyalty. Witch hunt! Witch hunt! The other half sat frozen, silence thick as a stone wall, the gravity of the evidence too heavy for slogans to shatter. The chairman's gavel struck over and over, desperate to tame the chaos. Order! Order in the chamber! But order was a dream slipping away. Trump leaned over the desk, jabbing a finger at Jasmine, voice rising higher, sharper, like a blade drawn in fury. You are nothing but a fraud, a disgrace. How dare you stand there and lecture me? I built this country back from ruin. I gave you jobs, safety, respect. Each sentence was a hammer. Each word spat like fire. The crowd pulsed with electricity, some rising to their feet in cheers, others shrinking back as if the explosion might swallow them whole. Jasmine remained seated, still, unmoving. Her hands folded neatly on the desk as though she were the only calm soul in a room set ablaze. That composure drove him madder. You think you can smear me with your fake papers and paid actors? He roared, voice cracking. You think the American people don't see through this scam? He slammed his fist again, the echo ricocheting off the chamber walls. The gavel struck back, wooden thunder against marble, but the chamber refused to quiet. It was a battlefield within a battlefield. Truth against denial, fury against resolve. Cameras darted between faces, some wide-eyed with fear, some lit with fanatic devotion, others furrowed in quiet reckoning. The nation was watching, and Trump knew it. Every outburst was a gamble, either fire to reignite loyalty or flames that would burn him alive. His voice cracked again, louder this time, almost a scream. They want to destroy me because they can't control me. They want to silence me because I speak for you. The crowd of loyalists roared back like a choir of thunder. You! 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 But amid the roar, the silence on the other side was louder, unmoved, unpersuaded. The camera panned to Jasmine. She hadn't spoken a word, not one. Her silence mocked him more than her evidence had. It was a silence that said, you can rage, but the truth does not flinch. Trump pounded the table once more, this time with both fists. The microphone screeched in protest. I am the most persecuted man in American history. No one has been treated worse than me. Not Lincoln, not Kennedy, no one. Gasps rippled. The comparison rang grotesque, almost blasphemous, yet still his supporters cheered. The schism widened. The chamber felt like a volcano seconds before eruption. The chairman rose halfway from his seat, voice booming. This hearing will not descend into a circus. Sit down, Mr. Trump. But Trump didn't sit. He loomed. Every vein in his neck bulged. Every word snarled like a predator forced into a corner. They want my head on a stick, he barked. They want to erase everything I built because I dared to put America first. The chant rose again from his half of the audience, hypnotic, deafening. America first! America first! And yet the other half did not chant. They only stared at the screens, at the evidence still glowing, at the man unraveling before their eyes. Jasmine finally moved. She lifted her gaze, meeting his with the stillness of a hunter watching prey thrash in a trap. But she said nothing. That silence was lethal, because in it, every viewer, every senator, every witness was left to measure the contrast. One raging, sputtering, flailing man against one calm, steady figure who had already spoken her truth through evidence. The balance was shifting, moment by moment, and Trump felt it. His words grew wilder, less sharp, more desperate. "This isn't about me, it's about you," he screamed, turning to the crowd. "If they can do this to me, they can do it to anyone." The frenzy he tried to summon wavered. Some still clapped, some still roared, but others, once unshakable, now stared with doubt flickering in their eyes. The cameras caught it, the nation saw it, and the chairman's gavel fell once more, final, commanding, "Mr. Trump, sit down." The echo hung heavy, as if the air itself demanded submission. For a heartbeat, Trump stood frozen, chest heaving, fists clenched, lips trembling with words he could not shape. Then slowly, stiffly, he lowered himself back into the chair. The battlefield had not ended, but the explosion had left scars, and for the first time, the great showman did not look invincible. The chamber trembled in silence, heavy with the echo of rage still bouncing off its walls. Then, she rose. Jasmine stepped into the center, each stride deliberate, her heels clicking like a countdown. When she spoke, her voice was low, steady, yet each word carried the edge of a blade. "If you are not afraid of the truth," she said, eyes locked on him, "then let me continue to read. But if you block me, it means you admit your lies." The words hung in the air like steel wire, thin, taut, and unbreakable. For a moment, even the chants died. The cameras swung to the senators. One by one, faces shifted, hesitant frowns hardening into recognition. The neutral ground, once wavering, was now sliding beneath Trump's feet, tilting toward her. Jasmine did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every syllable was an incision, cutting away the performance, stripping the chamber bare. "This is not theater," she continued, her tone slicing through the charged air. "This is the sworn testimony of men you hired, the ledgers you signed, the trails of money that lead back to you." The microphones captured the scrape of paper as she lifted another document. The nation's eyes followed her hand. "Here," she said, pausing just long enough for suspense to stretch, "is a signed authorization transferring funds through shadow corporations. Here are the emails coordinating the scheme. And here," she turned, holding up the paper for the cameras, "is your signature." A gasp rippled through the audience. It wasn't the words. It was the inevitability. Trump forced a laugh, but the sound cracked midway, thin and brittle. He dabbed at his forehead with a handkerchief, trying to mask the beads of sweat gathering at his temple. The camera caught it. The nation saw it. Jasmine advanced, calm as a surgeon, precise as steel. "Every time you shout, every time you strike this desk, you confirm only one thing, that you cannot disprove the evidence. You can call it a witch hunt, but this," she tapped the document, "is not magic. This is fact." The chamber shifted again, murmurs rising, not of outrage now, but of assent, agreement, recognition. Trump opened his mouth, but no sound came. The rage that had once commanded stadiums now stumbled against her logic. His chest rose, fell, but the words caught in his throat like stones. Jasmine didn't let him breathe. She pressed forward, relentless, merciless. "You tell the American people you are the victim," she said. "Then why do the victims keep pointing at you? Why do the records show your hand behind every curtain, your voice on every call, your name on every wire?" Each question was a strike, hammering deeper, not giving him room to recover. The crowd leaned in. Every senator leaned in. Even the gavel paused, as though the chamber itself had surrendered to her rhythm. Trump tried again, a forced smirk curling on his lips. "You've got nothing," he muttered, but the microphone betrayed the tremor in his voice. The smirk dissolved into silence. Jasmine stopped in front of him now, close enough that the cameras caught both faces in a single frame. His, blotched and sweating. Hers, composed, unwavering. "You say you built this country," she said softly, almost a whisper, but sharper than any shout. "No, Mr. Trump, this country was built on truth, and truth does not bow to anger. Truth does not fear you." The silence that followed was deafening, not empty, but full of the weight of her words, of the shift they carried. The neutral senators, those who had watched, hesitant, waiting, were no longer waiting. Their eyes, caught in the lens of the cameras, revealed it. They had chosen. Chosen her. The moment stretched, fragile, electric. Then Jasmine turned back to the documents, voice steady, blade-like. I will finish reading, line by line, page by page, and when I am done, there will be no shadows left to hide in. The chamber erupted, not in chaos this time, but in applause from her side, a sharp, thunderous sound that broke the tension like glass. Trump forced another laugh, but it was hollow, thin. The mask had cracked, and everyone could see it. He adjusted his tie, fumbling with his papers, looking anywhere but at her. For the first time, his stage did not feel like his own. It belonged to her. The cameras caught the moment, the sweat glistening, the uneasy smile, the silent senators leaning forward in her direction. The great showman, cornered. Jasmine lifted the document once more, and with the quiet precision of steel, she read. Not rushed, not dramatic, just steady, unyielding, merciless. Each word was a nail, and with every line she drove him deeper into the coffin of truth he had built for himself. The crowd did not chant. They did not scream. They simply listened. And that silence, that stillness, was louder than any roar. Because in that silence, the verdict was already taking shape. And the balance of power, once his greatest weapon, was slipping from his grasp, falling piece by piece into hers. That was when Donald Trump shifted. Not forward, but sideways. Not with facts, but with venom. His voice cracked first, then steadied into a sneer. You want to talk about truth, Jasmine? He barked, leaning into the microphone, his finger stabbing the air like an executioner's blade. Let's talk about your truth. The chamber froze. Every camera swiveled back to him. Every eye followed. He smirked, sensing the shift. The predator was bleeding, but predators know how to bite even when cornered. You sit there acting holy, he snarled. But I remember your record. I remember your scandals, your little stunts, your failures. Maybe the American people need to be reminded who you really are. Gasps echoed. A murmur rippled across the chamber. Trump's words were no longer about policy, no longer about money trails. They were knives aimed at her history, her dignity. He reached for his stack of papers, fumbling, then holding one high like a torch. She talks about corruption, but let's not forget, this is the same Jasmine Crockett who once, he let the sentence hang, deliberately, like bait in the water. The cameras zoomed. Millions leaned closer to their screens. Jasmine did not move. Her face remained still, carved from stone. But inside she knew the danger. One wrong reaction, one flicker of temper, one crack in composure, and all her momentum would shatter. Trump knew it too, and that was his gamble. He slammed the paper onto the desk. Tell me, Jasmine, did you really think we'd all forget? That we wouldn't remember the lawsuits, the accusations, the messy little chapters you tried to bury? Tell me, do you even believe your own lies? The chamber stirred, uneasy. Even some of her allies shifted in their seats. Whispers grew, like smoke filling the air. This was no longer evidence. This was spectacle. This was Trump's battlefield. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing, his voice dripping poison. You preach about honesty, but the truth is, you're a fraud. A fraud in heels, waving papers you barely understand. You want to call me a liar? Fine. But at least I never pretended to be something I'm not. The words landed like grenades, each one designed to provoke, to strip her armor. The crowd reacted exactly as he wanted. Some gasped, some laughed, some recoiled, but all of them listened. And that in politics was power. For the first time that night, Jasmine felt the ground tremble beneath her. Not because his words were true, but because they were loud, because they were toxic, because they spread faster than facts ever could. The cameras captured every angle, his smirk, her silence, the senator's uncertainty. The battle was no longer about evidence. It was about control of the narrative. Trump pressed harder, sensing blood. You hide behind your race and behind your gender, behind your sob stories, he spat. You think that makes you untouchable? No, Jasmine. It makes you weak. It makes you desperate. And the American people see it. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Some jaws dropped, others clenched. The attack was raw, ugly, personal. It was not just against her politics, it was against her identity. A dangerous silence spread. All eyes turned to Jasmine. Would she explode? Would she falter? Would she let anger steal the control she had fought so hard to claim? Her allies leaned forward, bracing. Her enemies smirked, waiting. The nation held its breath. The danger was real. One misstep here, and everything she had built in the last hour could collapse like glass under a hammer. And Trump knew it. That was the cruelty of his strategy. Facts could be argued. Logic could be challenged. But shame? Shame was a weapon designed to corrode from within. He leaned back now, smug, satisfied, folding his arms across his chest. He had planted the poison. Now he only needed to watch it spread. The silence stretched. The chamber balanced on a knife's edge. And for the first time all night, it was Jasmine who had to decide whether the story would survive. She stood still, no flinch, no tremor. A slow breath filled her chest, and when her eyes lifted, they were steel. "Here it is," she said, her voice calm, deliberate, every word cutting through the silence. "The clearest proof of all, you cannot refute the truth, so you attack the person who speaks it." The words landed like a verdict. The chamber erupted, applause thundered, rising from scattered claps to a rolling wave that shook the walls. Cheers broke loose, raw and electric, echoing against marble and wood. For a moment, Trump's roar was drowned out by something stronger than anger: belief. Jasmine did not bask in it. She raised her hand, gently calling for silence, and the room obeyed. Her gaze swept across the chamber, then straight into the cameras. "This is not about me," she continued, her tone unwavering. "This is about accountability. And when a leader cannot answer evidence with facts, when all he can do is smear, it tells you everything you need to know." Trump surged forward, trying to grab the microphone. "Wrong! Totally wrong!" The gavel slammed. The chair cut him off. "Order. The representative has the floor." The interruption was fatal. The cameras caught it, the image of a desperate man clawing for control, silenced by the rules he once bent at will. Jasmine pressed on, her words now a current pulling the room with her. "They want you distracted. They want you afraid. They want you fighting about personalities, not principles. Because if we stay focused on the facts, if we stay focused on the numbers," she held up her stack of papers, raising them high for all to see, "then their empire of lies collapses." The crowd erupted again, louder this time, senators rising to their feet. Trump shook his head violently, sweat gleaming at his temples. But the more he scowled, the more she shone. Jasmine's voice grew stronger, each sentence striking like a drumbeat. "I will not apologize for being a woman who fights. I will not apologize for being black in this chamber. And I will never apologize for demanding the truth." The chamber roared. Stomps shook the floor. Even those who had sat on the fence now leaned forward, drawn into the gravitational pull of her conviction. Trump lunged again, muttering into his mic. "No one believes this. This is a witch hunt." The chair cut him off once more. "Mr. Trump, you are out of order." That phrase, "out of order," hung in the air like a curse. It was the headline forming before everyone's eyes. Jasmine turned toward him, her expression calm, almost pitying. "You wanted to make this personal. Fine. Let me answer personally. My past? It's not perfect. No one's is. But here's the difference. I don't run from it. I own it. And I fight every single day to be better, for the people who trusted me to stand here." The applause was deafening now. It wasn't just clapping. It was stomping, cheering, fists in the air. Trump's jaw tightened. The predator had lunged, but his prey had turned into something far more dangerous: a warrior. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice dropping into a sharper, quieter register. "And you, sir, can hurl every insult in the book. But insults do not erase numbers. They do not erase documents. They do not erase evidence." She slammed the papers down onto the desk with a crack that echoed like a gavel. "Truth doesn't tremble because a man yells louder, and justice does not bow to bullies." The crowd surged again, a standing ovation sweeping across the chamber. Camera lights flared, capturing the moment from every angle. On screens across the nation, millions watched as the balance tipped. The scales, once Trump's greatest weapon, had swung hard toward her. For the first time that night, Jasmine smiled. Not triumphant, not smug, simply resolute. The chair tried to restore order, banging the gavel. "Members, members, please!" But the sound of the people could not be drowned. Trump sat back, fists clenched on the table, his face a mask of fury, barely hiding fear. He had tried to burn her with shame. Instead, she had walked through the fire untouched and turned the flames against him. The chant began in the back rows, hesitant at first. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" It spread louder and louder until it became the heartbeat of the chamber. And in that heartbeat, it was clear. Trump had lost his grip. Jasmine Crockett had risen, not just as a critic, not just as a challenger, but as the warrior of justice who refused to bow. The story would survive, and now it was hers. But Jasmine wasn't finished. Not yet. She reached down, sliding a thick folder from beneath the pile of documents. Its edges were marked with seals, its weight carrying more than paper. It carried finality. "This," she said, her voice low but steady, "is what you've been running from." The room hushed. Even the cheers stilled, as if every soul instinctively understood what was about to unfold. Jasmine lifted the folder, holding it high for the cameras, then placed it firmly on the desk before her. "These are internal communications, signed and dated. They show in your own allies' words what you denied under oath. They prove coordination, they prove intent, and they prove betrayal of the very people you swore to serve." Gasps shot through the chamber. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed in on every flick of her hand. Trump froze. His eyes darted from side to side, searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. His mouth opened, then shut. The rhythm of his breathing stuttered. For a man who lived on the stage, silence was his most dangerous enemy, and it had claimed him. Jasmine didn't blink. She turned to the chair. "With permission, I call our first corroborating witness." The gavel struck. "Proceed." The doors opened, and in walked a figure, once a loyal insider, now a voice no one expected. The audience shifted in their seats, craning to see. Whispers darted like sparks through dry grass. The witness raised their hand, swore the oath, and took their place. When they spoke, the words came slow, deliberate, impossible to twist. "Yes, I was in the room. I saw the documents. Yes, I was told to keep quiet. Yes, orders came from the very top." It was no longer Jasmine's claim. It was testimony carved into the record of the nation. Trump's face collapsed into shades of disbelief and rage. He slammed his fist against the table. "Lies! Traitors! Every one of you!" But his voice cracked, thin and uneven, the bravado stripped bare. And the cameras caught it all. Jasmine waited. She did not need to shout. She let the witness's words hang in the air, heavy as iron. Then softly she delivered the blade. "For months you told the people they were crazy to doubt you. You told them they were un-American to question you. But today, right here, before their eyes, you have been exposed. Not by rumor, not by speculation, but by your own signature, by the very people who once defended you." The chamber fell into an eerie quiet. No chants, no applause. Only the sound of truth landing like a hammer. Trump looked around desperately, toward his allies, his defenders, the faces that once leapt to his defense with rehearsed fury. But now they sat motionless, pale, their eyes lowered to the floor. Some fidgeted with their pens. Others simply stared blankly ahead. They had no script for this moment, no counterpunch for undeniable proof. The empire of denial had cracked, and everyone could hear it breaking. Jasmine drew in one last breath, steady and sure. She leaned toward the microphone. "No one," she said, her voice sharp as glass, "is above the truth. And no one, no matter how loud, no matter how powerful, escapes accountability forever." Trump tried once more, his words tumbling out, frantic and uneven. "This is rigged. This is a setup. Nobody believes this junk." But the chamber no longer listened. The nation no longer listened. Every camera, every eye, every ear was fixed on Jasmine. On the documents spread before her, on the witness seated at her side. And in that moment, the illusion shattered completely. The balance of power had not just shifted, it had collapsed. Trump's shoulders slumped. His eyes flickered, wild as though searching for a door that did not exist. There was nowhere left to run, nowhere left to hide. The truth stood naked, undeniable, in the heart of the chamber and in the homes of millions watching. And the silence of his supporters, their hesitation, their retreat, spoke louder than any accusation. Jasmine closed the folder, not with triumph, not with gloating, but with the calm certainty of someone who had carried the fight to the very end and won. Her voice, when she spoke again, was quiet. This is not about me. It was never about me. It is about the people. And tonight, the people have seen the truth with their own eyes. A final round of applause rose, not wild, not chaotic, but steady, strong, a rhythm of affirmation. Trump sat frozen, a man unmasked, stripped of the shadows he once commanded. And before the eyes of the nation, Jasmine Crockett delivered not just a rebuttal, but the reckoning. The chamber had fallen into silence. No rustle of papers, no shifting of chairs, just the hum of cameras recording history frame by frame. And at the center of it, two figures, Trump, Jasmine, locked in a stare that stretched beyond words, beyond politics. A duel in its purest form, truth against denial, resolve against desperation. Trump sat rigid, shoulders squared as though sculpted in defiance, but his eyes betrayed him. They flickered, quivered, unable to hold still beneath the weight of exposure. Jasmine did not move at first. She let the silence carve the moment, let it grow unbearable. Then, one step forward. Her heels struck the floor like a gavel. The sound reverberated through the chamber. She leaned into the microphone, her voice steady, slicing through the still air. Justice does not bow to power. It bows only to the truth. The words hung like smoke, filling every corner of the hall, creeping into every heart watching through the screens. The audience inhaled sharply. 1,000 breaths held at once. The cameras panned slowly, capturing faces frozen in awe, fear, disbelief. It wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was cinema, a battlefield, an execution. Trump clenched his jaw. His lips curled into the ghost of a smirk, but it trembled at the edges. The smirk that once disarmed crowds now looked like a mask splitting under pressure. His gaze darted to the crowd, seeking strength, but no cheer came. Not a single voice rose for him. And then, back to Jasmine. Her eyes didn't flinch, cold, unyielding, sharpened by the weight of 1,000 truths long denied. Two worlds collided in that stare. The world of spectacle, of bluster and manipulation, against the world of evidence, of accountability, of justice. And the cameras caught it in perfect symmetry. The man who once ruled through fear, facing the woman who refused to bow. Trump tried to speak, but no sound came. His throat tightened, words dying before they reached air. Jasmine tilted her head, just slightly, not mockery, but finality, as if to say, "This ends here." The chair of the committee looked on, frozen in awe. Even seasoned lawmakers knew this was no longer procedure. This was history etching itself in real time. The silence stretched, thick and unbreakable. Every second felt like an eternity pressed into the chest. Finally, Trump forced out a laugh, hollow, strained. "You think you've won?" he rasped. "You think truth matters in a world like this?" But even as he spoke, his eyes faltered, breaking from hers, darting downward for the briefest instant. And that was it. The weakness, the fracture, the surrender. Jasmine saw it. The nation saw it. And in that single fleeting glance away, his empire crumbled. She took another step forward, this time closer than ever, her shadow cutting into his. "History will not remember the excuses," she said softly, "but with the weight of thunder. It will remember the truth, and it will remember that when you faced it, you looked away." The words pierced deeper than any document, deeper than any testimony, because they cut at the one thing Trump lived upon, the image of strength. And now the image shattered. The camera zoomed in, on his trembling hands gripping the table, on his eyes glistening with the faint shine of panic. The chamber gasped as if they'd all seen the same ghost. Not a man untouchable, but a man cornered. For the first time all night, Jasmine allowed herself to blink. But even that blink felt like a verdict delivered. The chair finally spoke, his voice breaking the silence. Let the record reflect the testimony. Let the record reflect the evidence. Let the record reflect this moment. But no record could capture it in full, because what unfolded was more than law. It was myth being born. Trump sat back, shoulders sagging, eyes hollow. He looked across at Jasmine once more, not with fire, but with something colder. Recognition. Recognition that he had been beaten not by volume, not by spectacle, but by truth, carried in the gaze of a woman who refused to yield. Jasmine stood tall, unshaken. Her eyes did not soften, did not waver. She had not come for pity. She had come for justice. And in that final, silent duel of eyes, justice prevailed. The chamber, still holding its breath, finally heard the gavel strike. Sharp, final. The chair rose, his voice solemn, carrying the authority of the record, the law, and the weight of history itself. Let it be stated, he declared, each word measured, that the evidence presented by Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett shall be entered into the record and transferred to the committee for full review. The words fell like stone tablets, carved into permanence. The chamber trembled, not from sound but from meaning. This was no longer allegation, no longer debate. This was testimony becoming law. Trump's face flushed red, his fists tightening until the knuckles blanched. For a heartbeat he was silent. Then the silence shattered. Lies, he roared, his voice cracking under the strain. A conspiracy. This is all a conspiracy. He slammed his hand on the desk, the sound ricocheting through the chamber like a final, desperate drumbeat. Witch hunt, he bellowed. Corruption. They're all against me. But the words rang hollow. Not conviction, not command, only chaos. Reporters leapt to their feet, cameras flashing like lightning storms, microphones lunging forward to catch every syllable. The once commanding figure of Trump now seemed diminished, his anger not inspiring but unraveling. He rose from his chair, shoulders heaving, face twisted with rage and fear. Security stirred, uncertain if they should intervene, but he stormed toward the exit, voice still booming, spitting defiance into the air. This will not stand. I will not be silenced. America will see the truth. The irony bled into the air like poison because the truth had already been seen, and it was not his. The chamber descended into chaos. Journalists scrambled after him, cords tangling, lights crashing, bodies pressing against one another in the rush to follow history's fugitive. The committee sat frozen, half stunned, half aware that they were witnessing something beyond precedent. A president, once untouchable, now unraveling before the judgment of a nation. And at the center of it all, Jasmine Crockett. She did not move. She did not shout. She did not even turn her head to watch him storm away. She stood in stillness, the embodiment of calm after the storm, because she knew the moment had already passed. The verdict was not in the chair's words, nor in the shouts of Trump. The verdict had been written the moment his eyes broke from hers. Outside, the press swarmed like a tidal wave, their voices clashing over one another, questions hurled into the air. Mr. Trump, do you deny the documents? Is this the end of your campaign? Do you plan to appeal? He shoved through them, snarling, the fire in his words unable to mask the cracks in his armor. Every camera caught it. Every lens magnified his desperation. And around the world, screens lit up with the same image. A once dominant leader, cornered and raging against inevitability. Inside the chamber, order struggled to return. The gavel struck again, steady but trembling. This hearing, the chair announced, voice hoarse, is adjourned. But even as the words echoed, no one believed it was simply adjourned. No, this was the closing of one chapter, the opening of another. The ripple of this moment would stretch far beyond these walls. The public gallery, packed to its limit, erupted, not in chaos but in awe. Whispers rushed like waves. Did you see it? Did you hear her? He's finished. And Jasmine? She lowered her gaze at last, gathering her papers with deliberate care, as though sealing away the evidence of her victory. Not triumph, not arrogance, just resolve. Because she understood what few did in that instant. This was not her victory alone. It was justice's, and justice was never finished. As Trump's voice faded into the hallways, swallowed by the frenzy of reporters, the camera returned to her. Unmoved, unbroken. Eyes steady on the future. Around the globe, millions watched, replaying the clip, dissecting every second. A president shouting conspiracy like a wounded king. A congresswoman standing silent, her eyes saying more than words ever could. It was not just a hearing, it was a reckoning etched into history, and the world understood. On this day in this chamber, power bent, not to wealth, not to noise, not to fear, but to truth. Jasmine sank slowly into her chair. Her hands trembled, her pulse raced, and a thin sheen of sweat glistened across her forehead. Yet her eyes burned with a brilliance that no exhaustion could dim. Around her, colleagues leaned in, voices hushed but reverent. They called her name as though it carried new weight. Crockett, Congresswoman, warrior. And then one word rose above the others, whispered at first, then repeated, until it became a chant of sorts among the crowd of reporters pushing forward. Justice warrior. The phrase stuck like fire to dry kindling. The justice warrior. Microphones swarmed around her, journalists shouting, their voices overlapping in frantic waves. How did you find the courage? Did you expect him to lose control? What do you say to America tonight? She did not answer immediately. Instead, she sat back, inhaling slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down. She had stood face to face with one of the most powerful men on earth and had not flinched. That alone was answer enough. Across the hall, far from the blinding lights and clamoring voices, Trump trudged down the corridor. The cameras followed at a distance, their lenses cutting through the gloom. His once confident stride had fractured into something uneven. Not defeat in words, he still shouted, still gestured, but defeat in form. His shoulders sagged, his eyes darted, his voice cracked. For the first time in decades, Donald Trump looked small. The hallway swallowed him in shadow, each step echoing like a retreat into irrelevance. He raised his hand to shield his face from the relentless flashes, but the cameras caught him anyway. Isolated, cornered, alone. The nation would remember the split screen. One side, Jasmine Crockett, radiant, her colleagues gathered around her, the symbol of truth illuminated by the press lights. The other, Donald Trump, swallowed by the dark corridor, his figure shrinking as the shadows claimed him. The contrast was almost biblical. Inside the chamber, the noise swelled into a frenzy. Reporters typed furiously, headlines already being born. Crockett crushes Trump in historic hearing. Justice warrior emerges from Capitol clash. Trump storms out. Crockett stands tall. Phones buzzed. Social media exploded. Clips of the stare, the gavel, the outburst, the walkout, each circulated within minutes, consumed by millions, then billions. And in every frame, one truth remained inescapable. The balance of power had shifted. Jasmine finally rose, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead, her voice steady when she finally addressed the reporters. "This isn't about me," she said, her words cutting through the storm. "It never was. It's about accountability. It's about truth. And it's about the American people, who deserve nothing less." Her words struck not like arrows, but like sunlight, illuminating, undeniable. The crowd roared with questions, but she had already turned, gathering her files, her composure unshaken. She walked out not as a politician seeking glory, but as a soldier who had fought for something larger than herself. And the cameras followed. The hallway outside the chamber was different from the one Trump had taken. This one was flooded with light, streaming through high windows, casting golden patterns across the marble. The symbolism was unmissable. She stepped into that light, her silhouette framed against it, and the cameras captured an image destined for history books. Meanwhile, Trump's shadowed departure played on repeat screens, the once mighty figure now limping through darkness. The contrast seared into the collective consciousness of a nation, light and shadow, and truth and denial, justice and rage. The hearing was over, but the story was not, because justice was not a single battle won. It was a war, long and unending. And even in victory, Jasmine knew the darkness would regroup, would lash out again, would fight harder in the days ahead. But so would she. As she reached the steps of the Capitol, the evening sky cracked open, streaks of twilight painting the horizon. Crowds gathered outside erupted into applause, chanting her name, waving signs they had hastily scribbled. Justice! Truth prevails! Crockett for the people! She paused, scanning the sea of faces, seeing in their eyes not just hope, but expectation. The torch had been passed to her now. Behind her, the Capitol loomed, solemn, towering, eternal. Before her, the nation stirred, restless, awake. And somewhere, out there in the darkness, Trump's voice still echoed, a desperate cry fading into obscurity. The light had risen, but the shadow remained. Jasmine tightened her grip on the folder in her hand. The war was not over. But tonight truth had won. And as long as truth had warriors willing to fight, it would never fall. In the end, the clash inside that chamber was never only about two names, two voices, or two egos. It was about the timeless struggle between truth and deception, courage and fear, light and shadow. What this moment teaches us is simple yet profound. Power without integrity crumbles, but even the smallest voice, when anchored in truth, can reshape history. We are reminded that justice is not an institution. It is a choice we make, daily, in the way we speak, act, and stand for one another. And in choosing truth, we choose to be human. If this story moved you, don't just scroll. Hold it, share it, speak it aloud. Send it to someone who still believes truth can outshine power. Follow Harrison Stories, where silence is never an option. Turn on the bell, because the next reckoning won't be safe. It will be raw, and it may just change the way you see justice. This story is a fictional dramatization, born from real struggles and real courage. Any resemblance is not accident, but reflection, a mirror held to power. Thank you for watching. Justice is not granted, it is fought for. This is Harrison Stories.